Don't you want to know what they are?
You know, on YouTube, it's not uncommon to get a lot of hate when you share an unpopular opinion. For me, especially when it's a positive take on something that other people seem to hate. So here's another one for you. I like M. Night Shyamalan.
Denied! Sit down!
That's not to say I don't understand the hate for him, because I agree he's made a lot of incompetent and embarrassing shit. But it's easy to forget that when he's good, he's terrific. The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable rank as two of my favorite movies, and I really enjoy a number of his other work too, to the point where I can't justify calling him one of the worst directors in Hollywood like other people often do. So when it was announced that his daughter, Ishana Night Shyamalan, was making her directorial debut with The Watchers, I was cautiously optimistic. But then I watched The Watchers, also known as The Watched, so I watched The Watched, and to be honest, it wasn't what I was hoping for. The premise of The Watchers involves an American girl named Mina living in Ireland. During a drive in the countryside, she finds herself lost in the woods and eventually confined to a small area surrounding a building with a few other occupants, unable to leave because of monsters called the Watchers that will kill them if they're still outside by nightfall. Going into this movie, the main thing I was interested in seeing was Ishana Night Shyamalan's abilities as a filmmaker, considering her father has one of the most distinct styles of writing and directing in the industry. For better or worse. His movies usually have a very slow-paced, quiet, deliberately-ish stilted feel, with shots panning back and forth or staying completely still for long stretches of time, and actors giving very subdued performances. Sometimes this can add incredible tension and suspense to a scene, while other times it's the most pretentious, poorly put together mess you'll see outside of one of my videos.
What? No.
So, with his daughter taking the wheel, I was curious if she'd be able to harness the best of that style, or maybe even have her own completely unique presentation that ends up being great in its own right. And to her credit, I didn't notice any directing choices in this movie that felt unintentionally off or jarring like her dad sometimes does, and by all accounts, it's a competently directed movie. The problem is, it doesn't really amount to much more than that. There are a couple of cool looking shots that you don't see in many other movies, and a few fairly suspenseful scenes, but the presentation as a whole is just okay but unremarkable. The cinematography is passable, the editing is passable, the acting is passable, but that's about it. It also doesn't help that these characters are honestly some of the most bland and poorly developed that I've seen in a movie in a long time. I didn't find a single one of them to be interesting. Mina comes the closest, with her being an outsider to the woods and much less resigned to staying like the other characters who have been there longer.
I'm not supposed to be here, and I'm not staying here.
Throughout the movie, she makes attempts to escape, but she doesn't seem to treat it with any amount of urgency or show much fear that she could be stuck in those woods for the rest of her life. She and the other characters spend a good chunk of the movie basically just faffing around, not really doing much to progress the plot or develop their personalities. Mina does get a bit of an interesting tragic backstory that she feels guilty over, and there are a couple of decent moments where she learns to reconcile what she did and use that to resolve conflicts that are happening in the present. Throughout the rest of the story, her despair and self-hatred aren't explored any deeper than her just being a bit mopey throughout most scenes. And the other characters are incredibly boring and have little to no personality traits. There are times where a character will just sort of behave in a certain way for one scene and then never show any signs of it again throughout the movie. There's a moment where one of the characters named Daniel waits in the building at night for the Watchers to show up outside, and he acts like a host introducing them to a show. This happens fairly soon after he's introduced, so you assume that this is just the type of thing he does. Maybe he uses humor to cope with being trapped. But then he never does anything like this later on. Is this in character for him? I don't know. He doesn't have enough distinct traits for me to tell. And then later on, one of the other characters mentions that Daniel is impulsive and accuses Mina of using that to manipulate him. And when I heard that, I thought, wait, is that what his personality is supposed to be? Rule of thumb for any aspiring writers out there, if you have to say that your character is impulsive, they're probably not impulsive enough. The secondary characters are so flat that they genuinely put me in mind of that terrible adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. No, the other one. No, the other one. The one that Shyamalan made. Fuck it, close enough. But there's still one other major flaw that kills any chance of me enjoying this film. Put simply, The Watchers 2024, what you lack is one thing. You're not scary. Like I said, there are one or two moderately tense scenes, but the main issue is that it does practically nothing I haven't seen before from tons of other movies. A spooky forest is obviously not the most unique setting for a horror film, and while that's not to say you can never get any good mileage out of it, the film doesn't do much to make it stand out. Same with the Watchers themselves. It's explained in the film that they're shape-shifting creatures called changelings from Star Trek, Irish folklore. Their goal throughout the film is to observe or watch the characters so that they can learn to mimic and eventually replace them. They sound like potentially really frightening monsters, but the movie just doesn't take proper advantage of them. The film mainly plays into that whole trope of the things you don't see are scarier than what you do, which in a lot of media is often the case. But I feel like this is the wrong type of creature to do this with. The way the movie describes these creatures sounds really creepy, how they try to imitate the appearance of humans but don't get it exactly right at first because they don't fully understand what humans look like. They're described as having incorrect bodily or facial proportions or an incorrect number of fingers, things like that. You could have a fucking field day designing weird and uncanny monsters that could potentially be terrifying if you do it right. But instead, the movie pulls this keep them hidden approach for monsters whose whole novelty is based around what they look like. And on the rare occasions where you do get a decent look at one, they only look distorted in very minimal ways, not enough for them to be particularly memorable. The movie as a whole just feels kind of generic, a criticism that 9 times out of 10 I can't say about the work of Ishana Night Shyamalan's father. Whether that ends up being a good thing or not, it's at least usually more interesting. I'll be honest, while writing this video, I debated whether comparing this movie to M. Night Shyamalan's work as heavily as I did was really fair. Like, if I was Ishana and I spent years of my life making a movie, trying to make the best work of art I possibly could, would I really want people's thoughts on it to be so intrinsically tied to unrelated projects made by my celebrity dad? But the reason I ultimately decided to go in that direction is this. Look at how she's credited for this movie. She's not using a stage name, she's using her real name. That's perfectly fine, it's really none of my business what she calls herself, but whether she likes it or not, her last name does associate her with a director who has one of the most distinct sounding last names in Hollywood. Not to mention, her father is involved as a producer, and it's a supernatural thriller/horror movie, the same genre that he works in almost exclusively. I'm allowed to compare the two. And given my own thoughts on Shyamalan, where as much as I can criticize him, I still want him to succeed, I went into The Watchers rooting for his daughter just as much, so I'm really sad that I didn't enjoy it. I'll be there if she makes another movie, because I sincerely want her to improve. As it currently stands, though, I like M. Night Shyamalan. As for his daughter, the best I can say is, I want to like her, and I hope one day I do. In the meantime, let's just hope that in August we catch Daddy Shyamalan on one of his good days. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video and you want to see my next one even sooner, I upload all my videos early on Patreon, which you can support me on for just $1.50 a month. Not only that, but you'll also get a shout out at the end of every video, and you'll also get to see some alternate thumbnails I made while I made the video. If you're interested in that, check out the link in the description below.